Next we have Kevin Spann, who is at our MPA program in political science, and his mentor is Dr. Psyche, and Dr. Psyche could not be here this afternoon. And he's going to be addressing the American fiscal condition. So I don't know how happy we're going to be after we watch it.
There actually is one bright spot.
Okay, good. Well, we'll look forward to hearing that.
All right, so if you've watched the news currently, you know, since Obama's taken office, his critics really hammered him on America's fiscal state because there's quite a bit of room for improvement. But first of all, let's clear up some misconceptions. A lot of people get the national debt and the deficit mixed up all the time. And they're two very different measurements. National debt refers to the debt America's incurred throughout our entire history, going all the way back to George Washington. We've always had debt, we probably always will. No president's ever really addressed the debt. And this is a pretty good chart. It shows how various presidents and their parties have contributed to the debt. But it's a little bit misleading. The chart seems to imply that before the 1940s we didn't have debt. But because of the way the chart's scaled, it makes the few billion we had way back when look insignificant. Because the debt is currently about 17 trillion, which most would agree is a pretty incomprehensible number. Now, the fact that we have debt isn't that bad. What's bad is how fast the debt's growing. If the debt grows faster, then you can pay the interest off for it, or faster than the economy is growing, you have a serious problem. How frequently we've had to raise the debt ceiling is worrisome. But the fact that we have the debt isn't that bad. Now next is the federal deficit. Now yearly, when the government has more money going out than it has coming in, that difference is the deficit. Now, as you can see, during World War II, our deficit got pretty out of control. And then we roughly stabilized till the 1970s, in which case we had problems again. And then, of course, from the recession onward to now, we've had a lot of issues. During Obama's first term, the deficit reached about $2 trillion, which this chart's by percentages, so we've done worse before, but in terms of dollars, under Obama, it's the worst it's ever been. But the President and Congress and Senate have actually done a lot to address this problem. This chart needs to be updated. It only goes up to 2010. If this went all the way up to 2014, it actually looked a little bit better. The deficit has fallen to $648 billion, which is a significant improvement. And experts think that if we can maintain this trajectory, the next president might have a good chance at bouncing the budget again. Now next we have government spending. The blue line is how much money government has coming in, and the red line is how much money government has coming out. And as you can see, there's a big discrepancy between the two that needs to be corrected. Currently, government spending is at $3.5 trillion, and most would say that's a little too high. Now, when you look at these big numbers, it's kind of hard to imagine this is a relatively new problem for America. Up until about the Great Depression, we didn't have too many problems with the deficit. We usually had surpluses, if not a balanced budget, and only during wars and minor economic crises do we have a significant deficit. But that's far from the case now. So when you look at the trends, a couple reoccurring themes pop up for our fiscal issues. One would be increased domestic spending. Since the Great Depression, the government has taken a more proactive role in domestic issues. FDR and his New Deal cost quite a bit of money. Johnson's Great Society would bring us food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, war on poverty, job training programs, which are all important things, but they cost a lot of money, and every year the cost goes up a little bit. So if you have all this money going towards domestic issues, you've got problems balancing the budget. Now next we have our increased military spending. Before World War II, America had pretty modest military capabilities. Following the Cold War, however, we've really amped up our military. And as you can see, we spend more than China, Japan, France, Great Britain, Russia all put together. In fact, if this chart was bigger, it would show we spend more than the other top 15 countries put together. So you have all this money going toward domestic issues and military, you're going to have a lot of problems balancing the budget. The other half of the equation is relatively low government revenues, and that means tax cuts. Corporations have enjoyed a lot of tax cuts throughout since about the 1940s. Before the 1940s, corporations and individuals kicked in roughly equally to fund the government. Since World War II, however, corporations enjoyed a lot of tax cuts. And as you can see, they contribute a quarter of what they once did. And that's important because corporations have a lot more money on hand to kick into the system than the average individual does. So as we've gone forward, we rely more on individuals to fund the government. Unless you're a very high earning individual, in which case you've enjoyed a lot of tax cuts. We've had about 3 cycles of large tax cuts, starting with Kennedy, Ronald Reagan very notably, and George W. Bush most recently. Lastly, we have divided government. Some experts disagree on this part, but it seems to me that if you have 2 guys with very different ideologies that don't get along very well trying to run the government, trying to run a business or a government, we got a lot of issues. And of course, America tends to balance itself out. If the president's of one party, Congress will be of the other, and the Senate will probably be in play. We've seen this with Obama. He came in with Congress on his side in the Senate. He's since lost Congress, and he may lose the Senate this next go-around. So that means presidents kind of operate under a siege mentality. They have a short amount of time to get the programs into place. So if you're rushing to get something into place, you're probably not thinking too long term. So if you got to get Obamacare out in your first year or 2, you're probably not thinking too much farther down the road. And same goes for every president with, say, Reagan's Star Wars program. He wasn't going to get that out his last year in office. He had to do it early on. And also, if you're trying to run fiscally responsive, then that would mean a candidate would want to raise taxes and cut spending. But if that's your main platform, how likely are you to get elected? You might become a congressman, maybe a senator, but probably not president. So if you have this really chaotic, combative political system, fiscal responsibility is going to be hard to pursue. So at the end of the day, is America's fiscal state really so bad? Should we be buying gold and not using dollars and whatnot? And there's 2 schools of thought on the matter. Some economists believe in termites in the basement point of view and wolves at the door. Termites in the basement point of view means they see the debt as termites whittling away the basement. They figure our deficit isn't a big deal now or tomorrow or next week, but if it doesn't get addressed, one day it will be. And the other school of thought is wolves at the door. They see our large debts as an imminent threat. They figure other countries look at our high debts and they don't think very much of us and pretty soon stop doing business with us. So which of the 2 schools is right? It's purely subjective, but in academic circles, the termites point of view has a whole lot more clout. And they figure the deficit's falling. If we can keep cutting away the deficit, slow down our national debt's growth, then we'll just keep chugging along. And history's yet to be written, of course, so we'll see who's right. But in fact, there might be some room for optimism right now. So that's what I've got. If anybody has any questions, comments, I'd love to hear them. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any